Imagine you're standing naked on an open plain in Africa, 170,000 years ago. The sun is brutal during the day. The night drops cold enough to make you shiver, and somehow, your species survives this every single day, for generations, without a single piece of fabric on your body. You think clothing was invented for one reason? To keep warm, to protect skin from cold, from wind, from the elements. It seems obvious. Naked humans get cold, so humans invented clothes. Simple cause and effect. Here's the thing, that's not actually why clothing appeared when it did. Let's talk about lice. In 2011, evolutionary biologist Ian Gilligan, along with a team of geneticists, used a clever biological clock to answer a question nobody could dig up directly from the archaeological record. Clothing itself, being fabric and hide, almost never survives more than a few thousand years. It rots, it disintegrates. So how do you date something that no longer exists? The answer was lice. Human head lice and human body lice are genetically distinct species, and body lice can only survive in clothing, not on bare skin. By calculating the genetic divergence between the two species, researchers estimated that clothing lice split off, and therefore clothing itself must have existed, somewhere around 170,000 years ago. Think about that for a second. We know clothing existed not because we found the clothes, we found it hiding in the DNA of a parasite that needed it to survive. So why 170,000 years ago specifically? This is where it gets interesting. Let's talk about ice ages. Around that period, the planet was cycling through a significant glacial phase. Temperatures in Africa, where Homo sapiens were evolving, dropped substantially colder and drier than the climate our bodies had adapted to. And here's the detail that changes everything. Humans, by this point, had already lost most of their body hair tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of years earlier, as part of an entirely different adaptation: the ability to sweat efficiently and hunt in blistering heat. So when the climate swung cold, humans were caught in a uniquely vulnerable position. No thick fur like a wolf. No natural insulation like a bear. Just bare, sweat-optimized skin, suddenly facing genuinely dangerous cold. Clothing wasn't a luxury upgrade. It was a patch, fixing a vulnerability that evolution itself had created a few 100,000 years earlier. But here's where the story turns into something else entirely. Because warmth alone doesn't explain everything researchers have found. Let's talk about Blombos Cave again, and Hohol Fels. At Hohol Fels in Germany, archaeologists excavating layers dated to around 40,000 years ago uncovered sewing needles carved from bone, fine enough to work with soft, tailored material rather than crude draped hides. That's not survival clothing. That's constructed clothing, shaped deliberately to fit a specific body. And around similar time periods across multiple sites, archaeologists have found ochre residue and deliberate patterns worked into hide fragments and beads, clearly meant to attach to clothing as decoration. Warmth doesn't require decoration. Warmth doesn't require a fitted seam. Instead of a simple wrap, something else was happening. Anthropologist Ian Gilligan argues that once clothing solved the survival problem, it almost immediately became something else: a canvas, a way to signal identity, status, group membership, even individual personality, long before anyone would have called it fashion. The moment humans could cover their bodies, they started using that covering to say something about who they were. It wasn't just fabric, it was the first medium humans ever used to broadcast identity to strangers without saying a single word. So here's the plot twist that flips the entire framing of this story. If clothing were purely about warmth, you'd expect it to disappear the moment climates warmed back up. It didn't. Clothing kept spreading, kept getting more elaborate, kept getting adopted even in tropical regions where warmth was never a threat at all. That's the strongest clue that from almost the very beginning, clothing served two separate functions, running in parallel: protection from the world outside your skin and communication of the world inside your identity. So here's the full picture. Roughly 170,000 years ago, a cooling climate collided with a species that had already sacrificed its fur for a completely different evolutionary advantage. Sweating clothing appeared as an emergency patch for that vulnerability. Hidden from direct discovery for tens of thousands of years until scientists found its fingerprint buried inside the genome of a parasite. But almost as soon as it solved the survival problem, clothing became something bigger. Bone needles at Hohol Fels for tailored fit. Ochre and beads for deliberate decoration. A tool for staying alive, converted almost immediately into a tool for telling the world who you are. Clothing didn't just cover us, it created a version of us that could be seen, judged, and understood before we ever opened our mouths. You picked out what you're wearing today for a reason that has nothing to do with the temperature outside. Maybe it was comfort, maybe it was how it made you feel, maybe it was what you wanted someone else to think when they saw you. That instinct is 170,000 years old. And it started as a desperate fix for a cold night on an African plain. That's the most human thing there is. Taking something built purely to keep us alive and turning it into a language. Next time you get dressed, notice what you're actually choosing. Warmth was never the only thing on the list. Let me know in the comments what you think your own style says about you. I might build the next video around it.